is the head of the Natural Risks and Flood Forecasting Service for Paris.
Les scénarios de crues les plus exceptionnels sont ceux où deux périodes de pluie successives se cumulent. La probabilité qu'une crue supérieure à la crue qu'on a connue en 1910 se produise à Paris, elle est certaine.
The city's central districts and 2 million people will be directly affected. But what makes Paris so vulnerable is that much of it is underground. Michel Merli is the Secretary General of the Civil Defense Department.
Comme vous le voyez à Paris, il n'y a pas de fil électrique en surface, il n'y a rien dans l'espace. Tout a été enterré. Nous avons en particulier des centaines de kilomètres de voiries souterraines, avec métro, RER, grandes voies de circulation.
600,000 vehicles park underground in Paris every day. Art galleries store valuable works in basements. And with many domestic power systems on lower ground floors or in cellars, when the Seine floods, between 700,000 and 1 million people could be without heating, light, lifts and water for over 2 weeks.
Il y a aujourd'hui beaucoup plus de Parisiens qui habitent en zone inondable qu'il n'y en avait il y a un siècle. On est devenu complètement dépendant de l'électricité, du téléphone, des transports en commun, pris individuellement des bâtiments plus coûteux. Les conséquences d'une inondation seront, en termes de dommages financiers, beaucoup plus importants.
With losses predicted at between 12 and 20 billion euros, authorities have taken precautions. Dam reservoirs have been constructed to contain floodwater, high reinforced walls built in central Paris, and a warning system gives citizens 3 days flood notice. However, the authorities know that they can't prevent Paris from flooding.
Nous savons qu'on ne peut pas arrêter l'eau quand il s'agit d'inondations d'une telle importance. Ce que nous pouvons faire, c'est nous préparer à essayer de diminuer les effets. Vous savez que nous avons mis en place un dispositif qui est le centre opérationnel de zone, qui fonctionne 24 heures sur 24 avec des policiers, des pompiers, des gendarmes.
Flood evacuation guidelines have been published by the City Hall, and emergency management notices are displayed by law inside every vulnerable apartment. The able-bodied can make their own way out of the flood zone and shelter with relatives or in government facilities. The elderly, the disabled and the sick will be assisted by the emergency services. Art galleries have already moved valuable artworks to safety, and car park owners have agreed to pre-flood structures to prevent building instability. But there's one flaw in the Parisian flood plan. Parisians don't take a flood or a flood plan very seriously. They either deny it, don't know about it, or just don't care.
Pas du tout. Non, pas du tout. Je ne suis pas du tout inquiété par une inondation qui n'est pas du tout prévue.
Alors je sais absolument pas comment agir en cas d'inondation majeure.
J'habite au 14e étage, donc...
Ça m'effraie pas du tout et je pense que c'est même pas... c'est pas envisageable.
The Paris authorities are well prepared for flood, but there's a problem. The people of Paris themselves.
Les Parisiens ne perçoivent pas pour l'avenir une sérieuse inondation de la Seine.
Professor Bernadette Devancey is a sociologist at the Laboratory of Environmental Psychology in Paris.
Il y a deux types de raisons qui apparaissent très nettement dans l'enquête que nous avons faite. Le premier, c'est l'argument connaissance technique actuelle, maîtrise du risque actuel. Et la seconde raison est également celle de ce manque de vécu de l'inondation. Au fond, il y a eu un très fort renouvellement de population après la guerre de 40 de 1940 du moins dans la ville de Paris et la mémoire de ces inondations a complètement disparu.
The flood could come as soon as 2010. Parisians don't have much time left.
살과 뼈가 남아있지 않으니까요. 그 대신 굳은 재 속에서 부패한 폼페이인들의 몸 안엔 빈 공간이 생겼고 고고학자들은 이 공간에 휘반죽을 채워 재를 걷어내고 폼페이인들의 마지막 순간을 재생시켰습니다. 이 생생한 모습을 통해 폼페이 시민들이 어쩌면 영생을 얻었을지도 모릅니다. 그리고 완벽하게 보존된 이 도시에서는 그들의 삶을 엿볼 수 있습니다. 테렌티우스 네오는 젊은 법률가였습니다. 이 벽화에서 보듯이 그는 종이를 말아 턱에 대고 손님을 맞고 있으며 그의 부인은 철피를 들고 있는 걸 보아 글을 쓸 줄 알았던 것 같습니다. 폼페이 유적엔 화려한 색의 프레스코 벽화와 모자이크가 많습니다. 유혹하는 장면이 있는가 하면 구체적인 행동을 옮겨놓은 대담한 그림도 있습니다. 시내 매춘굴에 있는 그림처럼요. 고고학자들은 당시 매춘부가 쓰던 방도 찾아냈습니다. 하지만 대부분의 폼페이인들은 여가 시간에 극장을 찾은 것 같습니다. 그중 두 곳은 지금도 남아 있습니다. 희극과 비극 모두 인기였죠. 삶을 다룬 벽화들이 많지만 죽음도 글이었습니다.
And so it follows, the more people there are, the greater the risk.
For the first time in 2007, more people are going to be living in urban centres than in the countryside, which is an extraordinary statistic, really. They're going to be concentrated in megacities.
With over 3 million people living in and around the Italian city of Naples, it is one of Europe's most densely populated cities, and arguably the most dangerous. Because 25 kilometers away is Vesuvius, a deadly volcano. Neapolitans know Vesuvius is going to erupt. Neapolitans also know that a disaster plan exists. The problem is that very few people know about the plan, and the few who do have no confidence it will work. In the past, Vesuvius has produced 8 large eruptions. Most recently in 1944. It was filmed by the American army stationed in Naples. Vesuvius's next eruption could be within 100 years. Flavio de Bran is a professor of engineering and earth sciences. He's been studying Vesuvius for 30 years.
Based on past eruptions, we will see an eruption cloud building up high into the atmosphere. It would begin to collapse and produce pyroclastic flows containing gases, broken material from the volcanic edifice, as well as pieces of cool magma.
At greatest risk are 600,000 people living in the so-called red zone, 18 areas right on the slopes of Vesuvius. This is one of them, Portici. Portici is 6 kilometers from the crater.
This town will be completely destroyed. Deadly pyroclastic flows will move down the streets and engulf all of this area.
So, knowing the risk, why don't people just leave the area? Matt Davis is a risk psychologist.
I'm standing here in San Sebastiano, which is only 5 kilometers from the summit of Vesuvius. It was covered by lava flows in 1944's eruption, and yet people have rebuilt here and stayed here and have actually built homes and apartments on the lava flows from that eruption. People have lived there for generations, it's their home, they have connections there, and so they stay.
Which is not to say that the people in the red zone are complacent about the risks.
Definitely, there's awareness and fear here. I think the preconception is that people are in denial about their risk, and really that's not what my research shows at all. In some cases, on some of the surveys they've returned, they've written, please help us. If you know when the volcano is going to erupt, please let us know so we can get our families out.
The existing emergency plan is based on evacuating people from a 7-kilometer radius around Vesuvius, which includes the high-risk red zone, as well as the lower-risk yellow and blue zones. When alerted by monitors on the volcano, 600,000 people will have to be evacuated using all available transport.
Initially, it was proposed 3 weeks time to predict an eruption. We have no experience anywhere in the world where anybody is able to predict an eruption 3 weeks before it occurs.
One assumption is that people will be able to leave the high-risk areas easily and quickly.
Anybody who has traveled in the Vesuvius area comes to an understanding that just driving around, moving from one place to the other is almost impossible. So just imagine an eruption occurring, there would be almost a complete chaos.
The ground will deform so the railway tracks will become unusable. Bridges will collapse on the highways, making roads impassable. So the first problem with the plan is that it might not work. And the second problem with the plan is hardly anyone knows about it.
What we found here in the red zone of Vesuvius in these communities is that a really large percentage of people don't know anything about the evacuation plan. Something like 75% said that they weren't aware of the plan, and of the people that were aware, very few have any confidence that it's going to succeed.
But the biggest flaw in the emergency plan is that it's not thinking big enough. There's a possibility that Vesuvius's next eruption might be its biggest yet. 25 kilometers away from Vesuvius is Avellino, site of a 4,000-year-old Bronze Age village. Volcanologist Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo is studying previous eruptions in Avellino. He thinks another could happen again.
Dopo questa fase, il collasso della colonna produsse le nubi di gas, le nubi ardenti di gas e cenere, che ricoprirono i villaggi con uno strato di cenere spesso da qualche metro a qualche decina di centimetri. Se un'eruzione come questa venisse oggi, ci sarebbe una enorme devastazione in tutta l'area intorno al vulcano, fino a una distanza di 25 chilometri.
In other words, the devastation would go way beyond the areas envisaged in the current emergency plan and hit modern metropolitan Naples.
E in questo caso attraverserebbero anche la città di Napoli e sarebbero a rischio oltre 3 milioni di persone.
We actually are a flesh-colored fuzz on a dirt ball that's twirling in space. We haven't been here very long, but in our head, in the worlds we create mentally, we think we're totally safe. Now, how arrogant is that?
It's the same arrogance which assumes that just because you're protected against one disaster, you're not exposed to another. In London, Great Britain, they fear flood. But should they fear something else altogether?
In London, the perception is that flood is the major hazard, and people have actually gone out and built the Thames Barrier to try and reduce the risk of flooding. But actually, there is also a risk of a significant windstorm hitting London, and people aren't really aware of that.
In October 1987, a windstorm of over 160 kilometers an hour plus smashed across London and southeast England. 13 died, 1.75 billion euros of damage was done. 3 years later, another 3.6 billion euros of windstorm damage. Over the last 50 years, windstorms have accounted for about 75% of all natural catastrophe losses.
The worst windstorm we actually know about happened in 1703. The wind speeds in this event were around 110, maybe even up to 120 miles an hour in places.
Robert Muir-Wood is a geophysicist and chief researcher at Risk Management Solutions. He's employed by some of the world's largest insurance companies to model the effects of future disasters.
We could expect across South London in a windstorm like 1703, hundreds of thousands of buildings damaged. Southeast England is a very crowded place, and there are a lot of buildings here. We know about 5 million out of 25 million are in some state of disrepair. People aren't quite sure what is going to happen next, but sooner or later, the big windstorms are going to come back again.
We may not see more storms, but we're going to see more of the really powerful storms. The intensities of the winds, the wind speeds will also increase maybe 10% or more. And that may take them above the level at which our buildings can reasonably withstand.
When those storms come back again, it's not a question of if they'll cause damage, but how much. Paul Freethy is the managing director of RWDI Anemos, one of the world's leading wind engineering consultancies.
We know by doing tests that the sort of commercial buildings you see in this model are really going to work. The real issue with wind damage occurs with people's homes, which are less well engineered.
In an average year, around 200,000 buildings are damaged by windstorm in the UK. But the really exceptional windstorm can turn something as innocuous as a broken window into a disaster.
Seriously hurt. If they get broken by flying debris, it pressurizes the inside of the house, increasing the loads on the whole of the rest of the building. For lightweight buildings, that may even mean the whole roof coming off.
We're standing in a square in South London. In the event of a windstorm like the 1703 storm, a number of these trees will be ripped out of the ground. They will be broken off halfway up. They'll be falling on the houses, falling on the cars around here too. The glass which surrounds the balconies, the glass that surrounds the lift shaft, all of those things may be blown off and fall to the ground and shatter.
Building codes have been devised to withstand gusting of up to 113 kilometers per hour, with an additional wind load tolerance of 40%, adequate to withstand a future windstorm like 1703, but only if the codes are applied.
The general quality of standards in the UK is actually very good. I think the problem is buildings are not always built to those high standards or maintained properly. If we did have another severe windstorm, then it would be pretty devastating.
And very expensive. With 18 million properties lying in the footprint of a future windstorm, the Association of British Insurers has calculated that an event like the 1703 windstorm would cost 15 billion euros. The insurance industry is very, very worried.
They're getting extremely concerned because the numbers of natural disasters have gone really through the roof in the last 30 or 40 years. This is because there's more wealth, there are more people with wealth, and therefore the losses are getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Insurance companies are continually taken by surprise by extreme events. And people tend to forget rather quickly that you can have these catastrophes at all.
And there's a catastrophe on the horizon which none of us can afford to ignore.
We just have this fleeting moment, and we're meddling in the very natural system that supports our ability to live here. And future generations are going to regret the actions we've taken or not taken today.
Throughout the world, wildfires consume millions of square kilometers of dry and arid land. But now, fire is threatening an area of our planet where you'd least expect it, the moist Amazonian rainforests of Brazil. But what's happening in the Brazilian Amazon is no natural disaster. It's man-made. The Amazon rainforest is the biggest rainforest in the world. It covers 5% of the world's surface and 40% of the South American continent. Almost 2/3 of the Amazonian rainforest is located in Brazil.
Our estimates indicate that about 1/3 of the surface of the country is burnt every year. The average deforestation in Brazil is about 25,000 square kilometers per year. And we burn those 25,000 square kilometers. So this in itself is already a major environmental tragedy.
Alberto Setzer is a senior scientist at INPE, the Brazilian National Space Institute. Since 1985, Setzer has been using satellites to track fires in the Brazilian Amazon.
This map shows the fires detected by one satellite during the last year, 2005, over Brazil. This satellite, NOAA 12, detected over 225,000 fires in the country.
The fires are started by farmers who chop down and then burn trees and vegetation to make way for cattle and soybeans.
This plot has about 2 or 3 square kilometers. We're talking about something of 1 by 2 kilometers. So we have to multiply this by 20,000 to have a feeling of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Carlos Nobre is also a senior scientist with INPE.
Over 600,000 square kilometers of Brazilian primary forests have been cut over the last 40 years. And 80% of that huge area is being used as cattle ranches for cattle raising. So basically we are converting all the biodiversity, all the plants into beef.
Fire clearance is illegal, and the Brazilian government is trying to tackle the problem. A difficult task when covering 41,000 square kilometers of rainforest.
To get to those areas, you'll need maybe many hours or if not days. And by the time you get to the place, you won't catch the people who started the fires.
The task of fighting fire in Brazil won't get any easier in the future, because one fire creates the perfect conditions for another. Philip Fernside is an ecologist based in Manaus in northwest Brazil.
The trees here are not adapted to fires. They're very thin bark. As a fire slowly passes in the understory, which happens in dry years now, it kills many trees, and that sets in motion a vicious cycle that is going to leave more of these dead trees, open up holes in the canopy and dry out the inside of the forest, and lead to more and more fires and more dead trees, and very, very quickly you don't have a forest anymore.
But this is a disaster which isn't confined to Brazil, simply because when trees burn they release carbon into the atmosphere.
Half of the dry weight of the trees is carbon. So when the forest burns, that carbon combines with oxygen and becomes carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming.
The Amazon accounts for about 300 to 400 million tons of carbon a year. That's about 5% of the global emissions, roughly equivalent to the emissions made by automobiles from most of Western Europe.
You have a huge stock of carbon that is sitting there like a time bomb waiting to be released into the atmosphere. We're potentially facing a global disaster, and this is one of the places where it's beginning.
Brazilians may not realize it, but their country is contributing to a global disaster called climate change.
Climate change is not so much a single disaster as thousands and thousands, countless potential disasters all run into one. We're aware that climate change can bring stronger storms and more floods and rising sea levels and climbing temperatures, this sort of thing. But we're not really aware that it can actually affect the Earth's crust. But this is perfectly possible. The way it can happen is that with global warming, we melt the ice caps. Now that transfer of a huge mass of water, a load of water from the poles into the oceans, actually adds load to the margins of the continents, and that changes the stress and strain within the crust. It can cause earthquakes, it can cause volcanoes to pop off, it can generate tsunamis. If we don't do something, we're committing our children and their children to a living hell, as it were.
With climate change promising a future of perhaps more extreme and more frequent natural disasters, the question for us all is, are we prepared to survive that living hell?